안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하기를 실천하고 있는 동탄 왕코입니다. 운동해야죠. 오늘 일요일이에요. 지금 코로나가 너무 심각해져서 집에만 있습니다. 계속. 사실 제주도를 갔다 왔지만 제주도 갔다 온 지 오늘이 4일차예요. 아무런 증상이 없어서 전 안전한 걸로. 네, 운동을 너무 하기 싫습니다. 아, 으. 아, 일단 팔굽혀펴기랑 스쿼트 할 거고요. 그 다음에 저녁 먹고, 영상은 안 찍을 건데 저녁 먹고 턱걸이 할 겁니다. 일단 발굽혀펴기 먼저 할게요.
Korean officials say they're running out of hospital beds, with just 4.5% of critical care beds available in Seoul. Healthcare facilities are already strained by a strike by 16,000 doctors over reforms in the government healthcare plan. Spain is fighting a second fierce wave of the virus, with cases skyrocketing in the past week. Government officials announced that drug maker Johnson & Johnson will begin phase 2 trials of a vaccine there next week.
팔굽혀펴기 20개씩 5세트 할게요.
I'm going to have it, one woman says. We must use a lot of protection, as much as possible and as fast as possible. But others aren't so reassured. Another woman says, I distrust that given the rare and mysterious characteristics of the virus, we can have a vaccine so soon.
And then we're just going to tuck it in, and then you have a face covering.
A more practical moment from New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda
Super.
Ardern, whose country is also seeing a resurgence of the virus. She made a video presentation on how to make a homemade mask, which will be mandatory on public transport come Monday.
참 많이 잤는데 졸려.
Dr. Jonathan Reiner is a CNN medical analyst and professor of medicine at George Washington University. He joins me now from Washington. A pleasure as always to see you, Doctor. I mean, it was interesting today in Europe. We saw thousands of people protesting coronavirus restrictions. Here in the US this past week, we had booing crowds when asked to put on a mask at a Trump rally. That followed the Republican convention where you had 2,000 people in close quarters and no mask. Why does such a common sense measure cause so much outrage?
Because it's been politicized. From the outset, wearing a mask should have been presented to the public as a patriotic duty, right? The way certain things were presented to the American public during World War II, when there were shortages, and people really pitched in for the war effort. So as part of the war on virus effort, masks should have been pitched to the public as our patriotic duty. But rather than doing that, they were politicized, and in tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths.
And that is the slap in your face comment too. It's killed people. I wanted to ask you too. Speak to the damage done to the public's faith in what are core public health institutions. I'm talking about the FDA and the CDC. And what we've seen in the last week, a week or two, political pressure pretty much apparently has seen them make some pretty bewildering moves. What does that tell you? What is the damage caused by that?
Yeah, Michael, the CDC and FDA have over the years been the jewels of the American health agencies, independent, tasked with preserving the health and safety of the country. And on Sunday night, we saw this really inexplicable political event on the eve of the RNC to provide an EUA for convalescent plasma, despite really the objections of people like Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, the head of the NIH, clearly bending to political will of the president, and then the unfortunate misstating of the data by the head of the FDA, Stephen Hahn, followed just 2 days later by the CDC walking back recommendations, strong recommendations to test asymptomatic people. Very, very curious, again, suggesting political rather than scientific pressure was used to form that recommendation.
Yeah, very, very damaging. One thing I wanted to get to with you, because I know you've dealt with the so-called long haulers, ongoing impacts from this virus, very serious impacts, neurological and so on, and something that I've been following closely and with interest. How concerned are you that over the course of time we will see this as being a serious and ongoing health issue?
I am concerned about it. Look, I think the vast majority of people who are infected with the virus will certainly survive and do very well long term. But as the months have gone on, we've seen people with chronic effects of the disease, young people with illnesses that sort of mimic chronic fatigue syndrome after recovering from this. There's been some well-publicized data concerning heart damage and scar found on MRI imaging months after infection. So this is a very new disease. This is a brand new disease, and we're learning as we go. But the notion that we can just go for herd immunity and most people will do fine, particularly young people, is not based in fact. And in fact, some people will be sick for a long time with this disease.
Yeah, it's incredibly worrying. Dr. Jonathan Rhino, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Michael. Good night.
We'll take another break. When we come back, hundreds of thousands of people without power along the US Gulf Coast. Just ahead, President Trump tours the storm-ravaged area and weighs in on how federal agencies are handling recovery efforts. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
The Dan Gote Group stands at the forefront of African enterprise. Since 1978, we've touched the lives of millions of people by meeting their basic needs. Our belief in the promise of Africa has taken us into 14 African countries, with substantial investments that will propel the continent towards greater prosperity, promising jobs, improved standards of living, and economic growth. Dan Gote, for an empowered Africa.
While the world tests for the virus is testing us all. At DBS, it's testing our ability to think, feel, and act beyond ourselves. That's when we see portraits of courage, perseverance, and generosity. These are the portraits of purpose and responsibility. More of what the world needs today. For all of us. For all our tomorrows. Together.
Tonight, how does the world view the United States nearly 4 years into the Trump presidency? Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, Human Rights Commissioner Michelle Bachelet, and others weigh in. A GPS special, How They See Us, a global view of Trump's America. Tonight on CNN.
The world travels with you. Check in, log on, and get connected. with all of the latest developments at your fingertips. CNN Partner Hotels, connected to your world.
I'm Julia Chatterley, host of CNN's First Move. I speak with newsmakers. Do you think we're still in a bull market?
We need the world to keep pace with technology.
Risk takers? What about the prospect of an IPO, or is it too soon? And the ultimate game changers. How do you find valuable assets to buy?
The game changes constantly.
아 너무 힘들어요.
Your first
오늘은 그래도 해가 좀 뜨네요. 비가 안 오나요? 안 오나 봐요 오늘은.
Nights on CNN.
I'm Selena Wing in Hong Kong.
어제 저녁 치킨 먹었는데 제가 한 마리를 다 못 먹습니다. 그래서 오늘 아침에 남은 거 반 마리 먹고
Welcome back to our viewers here.
오늘 저녁은 뭐 먹지?
Around the world, I'm Michael Holmes. You're watching CNN Newsroom.
치킨을 또 시켜 먹어야 되나요?
The storm-stricken U.S. Gulf Coast is beginning to clean up after getting hit by that Category 4 Hurricane Laura last week. President Trump touring some of
그러니까 집에 우유가 떨어져서 우유를 사러 가야 되고
federal agencies.
편의점 운동 끝나고 샤워하고 편의점을 갔다 올 생각입니다.
2.6 million.
세탁기도 돌려야 되는구나. 세탁기도 돌려야 되고
million meals.
영어 공부도 해야 돼요. 지금 코로나 때문에 영어 학원을 못 가가지고 영어 공부를 안 하고 있습니다.
Incredible. Great job. Your people
영어
are
공부 오늘 내일 쉬는 날 계속 깨있는 시간이면 항상 영어 공부를 하겠습니다.
I haven't had one complaint with all
현재 팔굽혀펴기 20개씩, 그 다음에 레그레이즈 20개, 그 다음에 상복근 20개, 총 3세트 했어요. 이제 네 번째 세트 하겠습니다.
65,000 homes and businesses are still without power in Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. In some areas are so devastated, the energy infrastructure will have to be completely rebuilt before power can be restored. CNN's Gary Tuckman with the latest.
This is Orange, Texas, a small town on the border of Louisiana. This area was hit by Hurricane Laura. Behind me, grocery store company H-E-B, a large company in Texas, doing something wonderful. They are feeding thousands of people. Stores and restaurants are closed because of the hurricane. Many people are without water, so what they are doing is they're giving hamburgers, french fries, salads, water and ice to hundreds of people coming in cars. The cars are lined up for blocks to get this food and water, and they're very grateful. It's good to see this. Right near where we are, President Trump was here earlier in the day. He had a meeting with officials here in Texas, emergency officials. Before that, he was in the state of Louisiana, right across the border, only about a 40-minute drive away, in the city of Lake Charles, a city of 78,000 people that may be the most hard-hit area from this hurricane. The fact is, there are hundreds of homes that have been totally demolished, thousands of homes that have been damaged, and right now there is no power in the city and no water. It makes it very difficult. A lot of hurricanes we cover, power goes out. That's very common, and it'll take weeks to get back. That's what'll happen this time. But it's unusual to have everyone without water. But water plants were demolished, so it's a very difficult time for people, and it's very hot weather. They have no water, they have no power, and many people right now are homeless. The president toured an area in Lake Charles. He saw some of the devastated homes. He saw the trees down. He saw the power lines. He got an idea. He also talked to politicians in Louisiana. He praised the work of his emergency officials. Emergency funding is on its way to Louisiana and Texas. What we can tell you is this. It's tragic, the death toll. 12 people in Louisiana, 3 in Texas. But it's relatively low considering that this was the strongest hurricane to hit the state of Louisiana in 150 years. And it's even stronger than Hurricane Katrina 15 years ago, exactly 15 years ago, which caused so many deaths. Between 1,200, 1,800 people were killed in Louisiana and Mississippi from Hurricane Katrina. So this was a stronger storm. People took it very seriously. They're still searching for missing people. We just hope the death toll doesn't go much higher than this. This is Gary Tuckman, CNN in Orange, Texas.
Democrats are slamming the Trump administration's new policy for handling information on election interference. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, is scrapping plans to brief Congress in person about any interference. Officials will give written updates instead, and that means, of course, that they won't face any questioning. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden says the change is, quote, not how democracy works. He says it violates national security and American sovereignty. I'm joined now by CNN security analyst Samantha Vinograd. Always a pleasure, Samantha. I mean, firstly, look, you served under 2 presidents. Explain how extraordinary it is that you've got intelligence officials saying they will no longer brief Congress on election security 3 months out from an election where foreign interference is an issue. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I have never seen anything like this during my entire government career, even during my study of intelligence before that. This is extraordinary for all the wrong reasons, Michael. Let's remember why oral briefings are provided to Congress in the first place. Written briefings are not sufficient unto themselves to keep lawmakers fully and currently informed about intelligence activities or intelligence assessments. Oral briefings have a history of providing lawmakers with more context and allowing lawmakers to ask questions. The only reason a director of national intelligence would cancel or largely cancel these oral briefings is because
마지막
it's
5번째
something
세트
that he
하겠습니다.
does not want lawmakers to hear.
얼마나
There
했지?
is no
16분?
reasonable explanation
20분 전에
for why this
끝나겠네요.
action is taken.
You know, the president, I guess, well, he's already laid the groundwork in many ways to claim foreign interference in mail-in voting. By blocking briefings, is he perhaps wanting to keep the lack of evidence of that away from lawmakers and the preponderance of evidence of other things away from lawmakers? Because as you point out, in a written briefing, you can't quiz the briefer.
Yes, and there's a history here. Let's remember that the annual worldwide threat assessment and briefing that's delivered orally and in written form to Congress every year was canceled this year. That's after last year's briefing upset the president because briefers said things that the president found politically or personally inconvenient. In February, a DNI briefer gave an election security oral briefing in response to a question told lawmakers that Putin prefers POTUS, which we've now learned from a written statement continues to be true. That statement back in February during the oral briefing really upset the president. So it sure looks like the DNI wants to avoid having anything said to lawmakers that could risk upsetting President Trump because, again, he finds it politically inconvenient. The DNI needs to get his priorities in check. He appears more focused on placating POTUS than on protecting Americans.
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, it does does it make you feel like his interest is more in protecting the president? He is a long-time supporter.
It certainly looks like this DNI is censoring information to avoid upsetting the president. The DNI has a statutory obligation under various legislation to keep certain parts of Congress fully and currently informed, and going into the election to brief lawmakers on election security threats. There is no reason why he wouldn't give an oral briefing, again, other than not wanting to upset the president by pointing out the honest assessment from the intelligence community, which is that Putin still prefers POTUS and is interfering to denigrate Vice President Joe Biden as part of active Russian influence operations to support Donald Trump's candidacy in 2020.
Samantha Vinograd, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
US military officials say 2 Russian fighter jets made a, quote, unsafe and unprofessional intercept of a US B-52 bomber on Friday. Extraordinary video. This US flight was taking part in a show of solidarity with NATO, flying over 30 countries in all. Now, the close encounter you see there happened over the Black Sea. Barbara Starr explains.
What apparently happened is 2 Russian pilots, their fighter jets crossed within 100 feet of the nose of the US B-52 bomber multiple times, and that caused turbulence, making it difficult, the Pentagon says, for the B-52 to actually correctly maneuver. The Pentagon calling this unsafe, unprofessional action by the Russians.
That was CNN's Pentagon correspondent Barbara Starr there. Well, Irish politics has been plunged into chaos after dozens of current and former politicians attended a parliamentary golf society dinner, the gathering violating COVID-19 measures. CNN's Salma Abdulaziz with more on this controversy.
Like many in Ireland, Padraig Byrne knows the heartbreak of losing a loved one to coronavirus.
It was dreadful. I mean, we're as brothers, you know, we were very close. And we're there for him every day. And
너무 더워.
couldn't say a goodbye, we couldn't hold his hand.
이제 스쿼트 하겠습니다, 스쿼트.
Like that.
Podrick told his story to RTE's Liveline
스코트를
show. He last saw his brother through the hospital window.
하기에 앞서
Like even though we had
스트레칭 잠깐
I felt
할게요.
I was there, and it was very sad. You were gazing through a window at your brother just dead in the bed, and his wife and daughter there, and
But while he was carefully observing coronavirus restrictions, it's emerged some of the country's leadership did not. About 80 gathered at this upmarket golf course a week and a half ago, followed by a dinner at a nearby hotel in County Galway. The event sparked widespread anger in Ireland because it breached coronavirus restrictions on the size of public gatherings.
Absolutely think it was disgraceful. There's people losing loved ones and family, and they're all playing golf.
I just think it's one rule for them and one rule for us.
Soon after the story broke, Ireland's Agriculture Minister, Dara Callery, resigned. He was followed by Jerry Buttimer, who quit his Senate leadership position. And then finally, EU Commissioner Phil Hogan. He had initially tried to weather the storm of controversy.
It's completely wrong. And I am embarrassed about it. I'm very sorry about it. I know many families have been suffering.
스쿼트 하겠습니다.
Was not
아,
enough
이렇게
for
스쿼트는
Ireland.
하기가 두려운지 모르겠어요.
We've made very clear our anger, our annoyance, the degree to which the Commissioner has undermined public confidence in adherence to the health guidelines.
But the scandal is not over. There's now pressure on others who also attended the dinner.
We still have to see whether there's a Supreme
못
Court judge,
당했어.
whether he might be asked to resign or might be censured in some way. So it's probably not the end of the controversy in the short term.
The judge in question, Seamus Wolfe, was until recently
Oh,
Ireland's
허리가
Attorney
아프지?
General, advising the government on lockdown laws. He has apologized, but not resigned. The so-called Gulfgate scandal exposed deep anger within the Irish community at the perceived hypocrisy of some of the country's leadership. The question now is whether it will have any long-term impact on the government's coronavirus message. Salma Abdulaziz, CNN, London.
A tense rescue in the Mediterranean, a boat funded by the British street artist Banksy, so packed with refugees it couldn't move. The story of what happened next when we come back.
It is good to be back on the road. On the next CNN Business Traveller, expert advice for today's business trip.
The biggest risk is large congregations of people.
Keeping us safe every step of the way.
Yeah, it's sucked through every 3 minutes.
And a destination decision.
Nobody's wearing masks. I'm feeling peer pressure.
We're travelling safely on the next CNN
Oh.
Business Traveller.
숨게.
Any talk of diversity in our case from the inside, where we need to have it needs to be reflected right all the way to the top. And so we've now got commitments, whether it's about race, and especially for the African American, Black, and Latinx community, as well as gender, and to be able to have actual metrics. In fact, I myself am measured on it, metriced on it, and paid on it. And so we now want to take representation. And of course, representation can only be sustained if you have a culture of inclusion. So that's an everyday practice where you have to work in every meeting, every promotion decision. Experience cannot be different from an espoused culture, and that's all the hard work ahead of us, but we're very, very focused on it.
세 번째 세트 하겠습니다. 3세트예요. 3세트. 30개. 아 20개. 아. 아.
A rescue boat in the Mediterranean funded by the British street artist Banksy
무릎이 아파요.
crowded with migrants it needed help.
허리도 아프고.
After several tense hours, the migrants were transferred onto two other boats.
얼마나 했죠?
And now, well, where will they find safe?
26분.
CNN's Kim Bruno.
A ship in need, loaded with the most needy of people. The rescue boat Louise Michel required help itself Saturday. After it became so overcrowded with migrants it picked up in the Mediterranean, it was unable to move. The Italian Coast Guard evacuated dozens of the most vulnerable people. Rescuers said there were many women and children, some of them extremely traumatized. These are photos of a humanitarian ship called the Sea-Watch 4, making the final rescues of the remaining people on board. It also answered the call to help the Louise Michel, which is unlike other rescue boats. It's funded by the British street artist Banksy. A signature mural of a migrant, the heart-shaped life buoy, is on the ship's side. The Sea-Watch 4 was fairly close by since it too had rescued migrants and was waiting for permission to dock in a safe port, since many countries are wary of receiving migrants because of the pandemic. So far, the UN says more than 40,000 migrants have crossed the Mediterranean to reach Europe this year. Many of them are from Tunisia and Libya. On the other side of Europe, patrols have been set up on the beaches of Calais to stop migrants from making the 30-kilometer journey across the English Channel to Dover. British reports say nearly 5,000 migrants have come ashore in small boats since lockdown began, many recently because of incentives like warm weather and deceptively calm seas.
Vous pouvez très bien partir d'une plage ici.
You can cross from a beach or from a port with your sailboat, one activist says, starting out with calm seas and no wind, and in an instant you pass through a cape, you find yourself in rough seas with violent winds. Across the UK and Europe, what to do with the migrants and how to stop them from coming is an increasingly politically charged debate, with many conservative politicians calling for stronger border enforcement. A political debate that can't be heard on the high seas by migrants risking their lives for a better life and the people trying to help them. Kim Bruno, CNN, Atlanta.
Formula One's only black driver paying tribute to a superhero, Lewis Hamilton, in the perfect position to salute the late actor Chadwick Boseman. We'll be right back with that.
더 하겠습니다. 일단 스쿼트 한 20개만 하고 끝낼게요. 가서 샤워하고 슈퍼 갔다가 영어 공부를 해야겠습니다.
A nation divided. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, Congresswoman Karen Bass, and the WNBA's
못해. 여기까지 갈게요. 쉬었다가 이따가 턱걸이나 좀 해야겠습니다.
State of the Union.